Welcome to the 6th episode of the University School True Crime Podcast. I'm Joey Valerio, and I'm joined with my co-host,
Jordan Heiser,
as well as
Michael Paradise,
Dr. Folds,
Tristan Jackson.
And today we'll be talking about the Amanda Knox case.
So Amanda Knox, whose name was Amanda Marie Knox, was born July 9th, 1987 in Seattle, Washington. Growing up, she grew up in Seattle with her three younger sisters, and her mom was a math teacher and her father was a vice president of finance at a local Macy's. Her parents got divorced when she was only a few years old, and her mom got remarried to a man named Chris, who was an IT consultant. And in 2005, Amanda graduated from high school and went on to study linguistics at the University of Washington. And she was a very good student, and in 2007, she made the university's dean list. While in college, she felt like she needed to find herself, and she decided that the best way to find herself was to travel. And as this case went on, there were many interviews done and many people describing Amanda and who she was. And Amanda described herself as being a little bit quirky, a little bit weird, really outgoing, extroverted, fun, kind of nerdy, and really into Harry Potter, which is that Harry Potter you should remember for later on in the case. So 2020 did an interview, and on this interview, they described her as not heavy into being in the popular crowd, even though she was a huge athlete and could have joined that kind of crowd in high school. She didn't tend to do a whole lot of socializing in high school, except for in her small groups, and she didn't go to the football games and hang out a lot because she was not interested in that. But she would work on musicals with the school. And Amanda was the kindest person many knew, and she would do anything to make people happy, and she cared about everyone before herself. So after school, Amanda was very adventurous, and she decided she would do some traveling, as mentioned earlier, and she loved Italy. She had a dream of spending time in Italy because she had gone there when she was 15, and visited Rome, Pisa, and the ruins of Pompeii. And so she really wanted to go back since she was there before. She decided to work 3 jobs and save up a ton of money to send herself to Italy. And in September of 2007, she packed up all of her stuff and headed to Italy. So the victim in this case, Meredith Kercher, was born on December 28th, 1985 in Southwark, London, United Kingdom. She grew up with 2 older brothers, John and Lyle, and an older sister named Stephanie. In August of 2007, Meredith was getting ready to attend her freshman year at the University of Perugia, Italy, and she was going to be studying European politics. In Italy, Meredith had the same thing as Amanda when she went there when she was 15 and fell in love with it as well. She also felt like she wanted to spend time there and kind of self-develop similar to Amanda, and she was so excited to be studying abroad. When she got to Perugia, she settled into her new home and met her roommates, and there's a rumor that there was awkwardness and tension between them due to their varying personalities. Meredith was very introverted, not really outgoing, and as described before, Amanda was really outgoing, extroverted, very social. And Meredith Kircher died on November 1st, 2007 in Perugia, Italy. The housing in Italy, Amanda would be living in a flat in Perugia. And she actually lived in a valley on a hill on Via della Perugla 7. Doubt I pronounced that right, but she had 3 other roommates, and one of them was Meredith. 2 of them were Italian training lawyers, and the other one obviously being Meredith. Their flat was one of those that was split, so the bottom had someone else living in it, and they were on the top level. And while in Italy, Amanda got a job at a pub named Le Chic, and the owner of the pub was a man named Patrick Lumumba. And Patrick was a musician from the Congo, and he thought that hiring Amanda would bring in customers because she's this American girl that, people would be interested in talking to her and getting served by her at the bar. And he mentioned that Amanda was a good employee for the most part, minus she did sometimes get distracted. And on October 25th, Meredith and Amanda decided to go to a classical music concert together, and while they were there, Amanda met a guy named Raffaele Sollecito. And this is where Harry Potter comes into play because Raphael looked a lot like Harry Potter at the time. And Raphael was known to be a sweet, smart, and charming man, and he was from Bari, Italy, and was also studying IT. And Raphael and Amanda clicked very quickly, and they became instantly good friends. They immediately started hanging out as soon as she would get out of class, and they would meet up and go on walks and go to restaurants and things like that. And she said she had never been in love before, but she was falling for Raphael. They were spending pretty much 24 hours together, and they only had about a week of this, quote, honeymoon period. On November 1st, 2007, Amanda got a text from her boss, Patrick, saying that she didn't need to come in. And her and Raphael decided to have a really mellow night together, cooking dinner, watching movies, and smoking. And on November 2nd, Amanda woke up the next day around 10 a.m. They lived very close together, so she could walk back to her place. And around that time, she decided to go back to her flat. Amanda said that when she was walking into her house, the first thing she noticed was that the door was wide open, which was very unusual. And she decided to go into the house and didn't think anything was out of the ordinary. When she went into the bathroom, she saw a few drops of blood in the sink, but thought nothing of it. She thought that it was maybe somebody cut themselves and didn't clean it up. So she decided to take a shower, but when she got out of the shower, she noticed a bloody footprint on the bath mat. And for some reason, she still didn't think this was a big deal. That, same thing as before, maybe somebody had cut themselves and then stepped on the bath mat, which would be kind of unusual to get nearly an entire footprint on the bath mat and floor if you would just simply cut yourself with a razor or something. But still didn't think anything of it. So she went ahead and started blow drying her hair, and while she was blow drying her hair, she noticed that somebody had used the toilet and did not flush it. And that's when she freaked out and realized that something was going on.
Interesting. That's what.
That's the trigger.
Yes, that's what.
That's the trigger, apparently. And she realized that maybe there was someone else in the house by this. And this sparked her to run out of the house and go back to Raphael's place. She got there and told him that she was really freaked out and she didn't know where Meredith was, which was quite odd, considering you would kind of single out Meredith out of your 3 other roommates. That could have also just been maybe she knew where the other 2 were. And he walked back there with her, and 2 of them went in there. When they were walking through the house, they noticed that Meredith's bedroom door was locked. And they tried knocking on the door, they tried calling her cell phones, but she was not answering. I've seen multiple conflicting reports about the locked door, that sometimes it was usual for Meredith. When she would go anywhere, she would always lock her door, or that it was unusual that it was locked, and that's why they were freaking out that, maybe something had happened. But I'm not completely sure. So they started to get really concerned and maybe thought that she was on the other side of the door. Especially if there was blood, maybe she had cut herself or injured herself on something. And Amanda started to freak out, and Raphael tried to kick down the door, but he couldn't do it. Randomly, 2 officers from the civilian police force showed up at their house because they had discovered a cell phone which had belonged to Meredith. They believed that it may have been thrown out of a car which landed in somebody's backyard, and somebody called the police because of this, and the police were nice enough to bring it back to her. When they realized what was going on, they called the military police, and when they got there, they told everybody to get out of the house so that they could look through it. So when they knocked on the door, they discovered Meredith's body. She had been brutally murdered, and the scene was very gruesome. There was blood everywhere, and she was covered in a blanket on the ground. There's evidence that she had been held down, restrained, and she had a bunch of different wounds on her body and a severe gash on her neck. which the coroner says that was the cause of death. There were already many reporters at the scene almost instantly, and there were videos of Raphael and Amanda having strange behavior after this had been discovered. They were reportedly kissing and comforting each other outside of the apartment, and it got a lot of red flags from media. Almost anything you see on this case is that those two were acting really weird after this had all happened, which you wouldn't really expect from somebody who had just found out that their roommate had been murdered, or at this time possibly murdered. And it didn't look like those two were grieving at all. This made suspicion bloom even more when there was a candlelight vigil held for Meredith, and Amanda and Raphael did not show up. Amanda claims that Meredith was her friend, which is why this would seem so unusual. And I guess something that supports that is that they went to that concert on October 25th where they met Raphael. And instead they were at a friend's house together having dinner instead of going to this vigil. And on December 14th, 2007, a funeral was held for Meredith, and there were more than 300 people in attendance. When results came in from the autopsy, it was reported that Meredith was sexually assaulted. There were also traces of an unknown male's DNA on her body, and her body had a total of 40 wounds, which made police think that there was more than one person involved. During the investigation, immediately investigators were looking at everything in the house, collecting evidence, going through things, photographing everything, and they collected over 400 pieces of evidence, which think of that has this much evidence as the O.J. Simpson case. And in my opinion, it's kind of similar in certain aspects, at least investigation-wise, but that's kind of for a later discussion. But 2 days after the murder happened, police decided to bring Amanda back to the house to see if she could figure out if there were any knives missing from the drawer. And they thought that maybe she would recognize the one that was gone and they'd be able to find the murder weapon. Which, after I had done some digging recently, I found really odd, because I don't know if they found this initially or later, but there was a bloody knife imprint on the bed. So they had like the exact size of the knife that they were looking for. So it kind of makes me confused if they had found that initially or later, but I'm not sure when they had found it. When they did this with Amanda, she went in there and said that she was looking at all the knives, and it suddenly had hit her what happened. Her roommate had been murdered in their apartment, and possibly with a knife from their place. And she said that she was overcome with emotion and instantly went into hysterics, and the police thought this was very strange. And she kept on hitting and covering her ears as if she was hearing or reliving this traumatic event. However, at this point, she was not considered a suspect. On November 5th, the police called in Raphael for questioning, and Amanda was actually not asked to be questioned at all, but she decided to come with him and waited in the waiting room. While being questioned, there were reports that Amanda had super weird behavior, and people reported that she was doing cartwheels, exercising, stretches, and yoga. Amanda says that it was extremely blown out of proportion and that all she was doing was stretching because she was waiting there for hours, and that she had done the splits, which was still very weird of something to admit to, especially in this circumstance.
Especially for like a waiting room is not it's not typical to see that, so I think it definitely falls under the category of strange, but I don't know if that's enough.
Criminal behavior.
Yeah, that's not really. I'm gonna need some more
evidence towards conviction. But meanwhile, Raphael was being questioned, and they asked for his version of what happened that night and what he was doing, and etc. He started out by saying that he and Amanda were at his apartment the entire night, and the police decided this was not a good answer, so they decided to keep questioning him. At some point, Raphael said that he started to lose his sense of reality because they questioned him for so long. He said that he suddenly became delusional and changed his entire story. He said that he had been lying to them the entire time because Amanda had told him what to say. He said that Amanda did not get to his house until 1 a.m. After he changed his story, they wanted to take a look at Amanda's phone to see if there was any proof of where she was that night, or to see if there was anything to prove that she was at Raphael's house or when she had gotten there. When they were going through her phone, they found a text message from her boss saying that she did not have to come into work, which matched with her story, and she replied to him, obviously in Italian, but translated, "We will see each other later, have a good night." So police took this as she was going to be seeing Patrick later that night. At this point, they decided they wanted to start interrogating Amanda. Now, I will say, I watched the Netflix documentary on this, and which was very biased towards Italy, I will say that. But it has Amanda saying that by this, she meant that she would see him later on a different day, like how any of us would say it. But police decided to twist it to say that, or try to convince her that she's the one that did it. And Amanda said that she could not remember exactly what happened while she was being interrogated because she was under so much stress. She said that the police were screaming at her, cursing at her, threatening her, scaring her, and saying things like, "We have stuff that proves that you did this." At one point, a police officer physically assaulted her by smacking her on the back of the head and telling her that she better remember. By 1:45 a.m., Amanda said that she was completely exhausted. She had been questioned and interrogated for hours on end, and Amanda says that when she had been verbally and physically attacked, she also became sort of delusional and told the police that Patrick, the owner of the pub, did it. Amanda claims that in that moment she thought that Patrick really did do it. They were screaming at her so much and freaking her out that she somehow created a vision in her head that showed Patrick at her house and Meredith screaming. Police believed Amanda, and they went to Patrick's house and arrested him. So, I mean, kind of putting Patrick in a bad spot because, you know, he's your boss, and you're saying that he's the one that committed this brutal murder.
Yeah, even though like there's no like his name was not brought up until this point in the investigation, was it?
Well, except for them going through the text messages.
Well, yeah, but like he was never once even thought to be a suspect. Like they didn't even think to make him a suspect, let alone actually make him a suspect until this point. And it seems like, I don't know, it seems like she's kind of just grasping at things, like grasping at straws here, like trying to figure out. I mean, it does kind of seem like she's trying to figure out a way out of this, if I'm being honest.
Seems like the police are grasping at straws, too.
Yeah, that's also true.
Do you say have a good night to someone you're going to see later that night? I usually wouldn't.
Yeah, that's what I
Me
kept
neither.
thinking is, why would you say have a good night if you're about to see them later?
Yeah. And I mean, if I murdered somebody, I probably wouldn't be trying to draw attention to myself by doing cartwheels in the waiting room.
Right.
She
Yeah.
seems kind of eccentric.
Yeah.
And the huge part of this entire case is that the police were trying to get Amanda to believe that she did it. And on top of that, it's in Italy. So it's the thing with Italy compared to America is that in Italy, you're guilty until proven innocent. And in America, you're innocent until proven guilty. So obviously an American, knowing the American standards of law, when you go over, especially when you go over into another country, you're a foreigner. They don't necessarily like you there because you're not from there. So they're going to do everything in their power to make you the main suspect and make you at least get convicted in a lot of cases. On November 6th, Amanda and Raphael were also arrested. Shortly after this, Amanda wrote them a letter saying that she wasn't quite sure about what she said about Patrick, that she felt like she was under immense stress and pressure. She said that she almost felt like she was in a, quote, dreamlike state, and felt very uncomfortable and said things that she did not think were true. Soon after this, Amanda's friends around the town started coming forward saying that Amanda was acting really weird after the murder. One friend had said, quote, "I hope Meredith didn't suffer badly." And Amanda responded to her by saying, quote, "Of course she suffered. She had her throat cut." They thought that it was really weird that someone would say something so nasty like this, following something that happened to one of their friends. And all three of them were placed in an Italian prison. At this point, this case had become international, and when the police and media looked at Raphael and Amanda's social media profiles, they did not find the best pictures of them. The two main pictures that circulated around the media were Amanda holding a machine gun while laughing, and Raphael had a picture of him dressed up as a mummy holding a giant knife. Not the best impressions, just right off the bat, of those two.
I got nothing for that.
It's odd. Really odd.
I usually have something, but I got nothing
Maybe
for
it was
that.
Halloween. Maybe?
I mean, that was the main picture that anybody could find of him. Was
Oh, wait,
him
that's
holding
that.
it.
Wait, that's the profile pic.
Yeah, that was the main picture anybody
wait.
could find of him.
Okay, never mind.
Yeah, it just has a machete and
Okay,
machine
that's
gun.
different.
That's nice.
And on top of all this, Amanda was shamed by the media for her sexual preferences and activeness, and it was also discovered and reported that Amanda and Raphael had gone shopping the day after Meredith was murdered. 3 weeks after Patrick was arrested, a customer was able to give the police evidence that showed him at his own bar working when the murder happened, which gave him an alibi, and he was set free. Upon further investigation, they went to Raphael's house and went through all of his kitchen tools to see if any of them were used or missing, and they found a knife that matched the supposed murder weapon. After running a DNA test, apparently Amanda's DNA was found on the handle and Meredith's DNA was found on the blade. Amanda said that she had no idea why either of their DNA was on the knife, and she questioned the police in all of this. She was saying that it was basically impossible for Meredith's DNA to be over at Raphael's house. Now, this I found from the Netflix documentary, but when the knife was being examined, there were 50 pieces of other evidence with Meredith's DNA in the same area, which caused contamination between evidence, and it kind of skewed this entire case.
That's going to be pretty hard to play off.
Yes.
45 days into the investigation, they found a clip from Meredith's bra. They did DNA tests on this clip and found that Raphael's DNA was on it. But like I just said, there was most likely contamination between evidence, so this might not have been completely accurate. And they also found a fingerprint on Meredith's pillow that was underneath her body. When they ran this DNA, they found that it matched a man named Rudy Gayday. They also did a DNA test by reading his apartment that he was staying in and getting DNA right off of his toothbrush. And it turns out that his DNA was found on her bra strap, the sleeve of her sweatshirt, and on her body. Rudy had been convicted of breaking and entering before, and people in the community said he was known for being just a sketchy guy in general. By the time the police made this discovery, he was already headed off to Germany. On November 20th, an international arrest warrant was issued for Rudy, and when they finally got a hold of him, he told them that he met Amanda and Meredith when he was playing basketball with the people that lived on the bottom floor of their apartment. Rudy said that he actually met Meredith the night before she died. He also said that the next day he went to Meredith's house and it started getting physical, but they didn't do anything, which would explain why his DNA was on her. Rudy says that he then went to the bathroom, and while he was in there, he heard screaming. When he came out, he said he saw a man standing over Meredith, and he says that the man then tried to attack him, cutting his hand with the knife, and then ran out of the house. But on that, nobody has confirmed if he actually had a fresh cut on his hand when he was arrested or not. Kind of similar to the OJ case, how they said he might have cut his hand and dripped blood on the scene and stuff like that, and then he happened to have a fresh cut on his hand a couple days later. But Rudy claims that he saw Meredith bleeding with her throat cut, and he tried to stop the bleeding, and that's how he left a thumbprint on her pillow. He said that the bleeding started getting worse, and he started to panic and ran out of the house. He said that he regrets not calling 911. When luminol was used on the crime scene, 3 blood-stained footprints appeared, as well as some other smaller bloodstains. Amanda and Meredith's DNA were found in 5 different places in the apartment where there was blood. They also discovered that the bloody footprint that was on the bath mat was the same size and shape as Amanda's. A little of Amanda's blood was also found in the bathroom, and so was Meredith's. But then again, they both lived there. So a lot of this doesn't completely match up, because how can you say that somebody that lives there is not going to have DNA in the house?
You said that the bloody footprint matched her shoes, though, and like
Or her foot.
size.
It was just foot, not
Or her
sure.
foot size, and like her foot, like it matched. That's, and like, why would Amanda be bleeding?
I mean, a lot of that could have also, like, if you go off of Rudy's story, how he went into the bathroom, if he's the one that did it, or one of the main people that did it, they never tested his footprints,
Yeah.
at least to my knowledge. So it could have been him, after he did it, had stepped in blood, and then went in there, because there's evidence that he did go in there, and then didn't even notice that he left it and just ran out of the house. On December 17th in the courthouse, the lead prosecutor asked Amanda why she blamed Patrick if he wasn't even there. Amanda explained that she was under immense stress and pressure, but they did not believe her and kept telling her she was lying. When Amanda was admitted into jail, they gave her an STD test, which I don't know if that's protocol in Italy or not, but I think this was just all an elaborate scheme just to get in her head even more. And this is when she was told that she was HIV positive and she was going to get AIDS. She was extremely upset about this and decided to write about this in a diary. In her diary, she wrote about how she was shocked, she was really scared that she was going to get AIDS and die, and that she always wanted a family, but now it was never going to happen. This journal got leaked to the media somehow, and it became public. So this just really shows you into what mind games they were trying to play with her to get her to admit that she did it.
I feel like the police want her to say it's her more than anyone here. I feel like they'd want her.
Well, I mean,
to
if you get
admit to
a
it.
verbal confession from somebody, a
But
lot of times
I think they want
concrete evidence.
I think they're trying to get her to admit to doing it just so that this whole thing can be over.
Yeah.
Not necessarily because she actually did it.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, that goes
I agree
along
with that.
a lot.
Especially since their evidence is pretty weak.
Yeah.
And this case turned into shaming her for supposedly having STDs on top of what was mentioned earlier. But she did not actually have HIV, and they only told her that to scare her and mess with her. So like I was saying, just mind games, just to try and mess with her and get her to admit things that weren't even true. So Rudy's trial began in September of 2008, and during his trial, one of the things that they discovered was that Rudy said Amanda had nothing to do with it. But when he got to court, he changed his story. He said that he actually saw Amanda's silhouette, and despite his attempts to prove his innocence, Rudy was found guilty of helping in the murder. Even though Rudy was found guilty of this, the media barely put any attention to him. Amanda began her trial on January 16, 2009. The prosecution basically said that the motive for Amanda was that her roommate did not get along with her and that she did not approve of her, quote, crazy ways. She wasn't supportive of her partying, drinking, being sexually active, etc. One thing they noted during court was the way that Amanda and Raphael acted after the murder. They acted very nonchalant and just kind of moped around, comforting each other. The prosecution basically set up their whole case as this is a staged break-in. They thought that it was really strange that nothing had been taken. They thought it was really weird that someone would just break in, kill somebody, and then just leave. They said that the glass from the window was on top of Meredith's clothes, and if the glass was broken before the murder, it would have been underneath her clothes. The prosecution argued that there was some type of fight between them, a physical altercation, And the defense argued that the evidence was not good enough due to the fact that they both lived there, like I've been saying.
Mm-hmm.
They also argued that they could have been finding Amanda's spit, not her blood, because they come across the same under luminol. And if you don't know what luminol is, it's basically used on crime scenes to detect unseeable DNA evidence, like blood, saliva, stuff like that. It's really helpful in a lot of cases, but you can't actually determine what it is. The only way to really determine whether it's blood or not is if you use, it's like a blood detection spray, mainly for when they clean crime scenes, is when it hits blood, it'll foam up, but when it hits anything but blood, it won't foam. But that I'm aware of, they really only used luminol actually during the trial.
So if you have something that detects blood,
Yeah.
why wouldn't you
that makes sense.
Why wouldn't you use it?
Because that's more for cleaning crime scenes.
But
So it would kind of contaminate their crime scene, whereas when you're initially investigating, all you're trying to do is just find as many pieces of evidence as possible, and you're not really trying to see what it is necessarily if it's not blatantly obvious.
Yeah, I know, but like in the sense of if you have a tool that you can.
I mean, I see what you're
detect
saying.
it.
I see what you're saying.
I know it's used for cleaning, but like, just use it. If you have a tool, just use it.
Yeah, why wouldn't you
Find out.
use it?
It's better than luminol.
Yeah.
Wow, we found her spit in her bathroom.
Of
She's
the
guilty.
house that she lived in.
Yeah, she's guilty.
The defense also said that the blood they found was actually her saliva, like I just said, and that's where the DNA came from. The trial ended up lasting a very long time, 323 days. And on December 4th, 2009, the court finally had a verdict. The day before the verdict was read, Amanda read her last statement at court. Amanda, Rudy, and Raphael were all found guilty. On June 9th, 2009, Amanda told her side of the story. She spent the next 2 days on the stand, and she was asked about why she said that it was Patrick and why she would blame him if he had nothing to do with it, and she gave the same reason as before. The judge sentenced Rudy to 30 years in prison after he requested a fast-track trial, and Rudy said that Amanda had nothing to do with it, and she was not even there. He then ordered Amanda and Raphael to stand trial for murder in early December. He also sentenced Amanda to 26 years and Raphael to 25. She got the extra year because she made up the whole lie about Patrick.
Wait, so why is like Rudy? Why does his statement keep on changing? She wasn't there, and then she was there. Because in the beginning of the trial, he said
That she wasn't there,
and
and then
said
now
it
he's like,
again, and now back to she wasn't there.
I mean, that's why part of Amanda's story makes me think she's not guilty. It's because she's not really changing her story a whole ton.
No.
Whereas Rudy has changed his story
3 times.
to our knowledge 3 times. And Raphael, he changed his story once. But that also could have just been recalling different
Right.
events or things like that.
Retracking your memory.
Yeah.
So you do change your story if you do that. So that makes sense to change it once. But changing it 3 times, I mean, by the first time you give your statement, it's like if you do a speech. When you first give it, it's like, it's a rough draft, so you like don't have all the information, but you have it, so that the second time you should be like completely and know everything. But like a third time really isn't needed because you should already have it finalized.
Exactly. In America, there were a lot of people that were angry about the verdict and believed that she was innocent. In Italy, there were a lot of people saying that they were angry towards Amanda, especially the press. Americans kept saying how she was convicted of murder that she didn't even commit and how unfair this was. And Donald Trump, before he was president, obviously said that he would help the family if they wanted him to, and he believed that she was innocent himself. Her family left Italy without her and immediately started working on getting an appeal. On November 24th, 2010, they all met back up in the courthouse for an appeal. At this point, Amanda and Raphael had been in jail for 3 years, And because this case was so drawn out, there was a new prosecutor and a new judge. The main thing that they argued was that Rudy did the murder, and there were inmates in the jail who said that Rudy confessed to it. During more investigation, the appeals court said that they were going to do another test of DNA. They ended up finding an independent forensic expert who could look at the DNA on the knife and the bra clip. After they looked at it, they claimed to have found 54 mistakes. Forensic experts argued that the spread of DNA happens very easily. It is as simple as brushing your arm against something, and it's even possible that dry skin can flake off and land on things. They said it was technically possible that they did not touch the knife or the bra strap. This is why it was so important to leave a crime scene as it is, and when they're looking at DNA, to keep it separate so that it won't contaminate. They also discovered that the investigative team who was working at the crime scene did not switch their shoe covers when going room to room.
You're kidding me.
So these guys are like rookies, basically.
Oh my
They were acting like rookies, yeah.
Oh my god.
They're not even
Serious?
trying to like actually figure things out here. They're just
54 mistakes.
Right.
That's what we're aware of.
like every so often I get like one or two things that were wrong, but
Right.
50 if you're wrong 54 times,
Your job, dude.
Like,
you don't deserve
it's
the
your
job.
That's your specialty, is this
Yeah.
kind of stuff, and you're
Right.
messing it up
And
that much.
you're jeopardizing people's like lives. You're
Exactly.
putting them in jail, so now it could not be them, but they're still in jail because of the verdict.
Exactly.
So, like,
regardless of like if you're involved in a case like this, your life is ruined. Pretty
yeah, I
much.
mean, yeah.
Like
that's
even
it.
if you are found not guilty and it's proven that you didn't do it, your life is pretty much
Yeah.
over. Because like people
Everybody
are still,
sees you
everybody
as
has their
this-
own opinion on things,
Right.
and everybody still sees you as this like potential murderer, even if it's proven
Yep.
that you didn't do it.
But they also argued that the bra clip was there for 46 days after Meredith was found, meaning that some other person's DNA could have been on it. Even though Raphael's DNA was found on the bra strap, there were 2 other people's DNA found on it. 2 unknown DNA.
So from the start, you probably should have gotten like a private investigator.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
you need to do that from the start instead of waiting until they're all picked. All their sentences have been proven and decided.
Jeez.
The police decided to not count that as evidence. They also pointed out that the DNA that was found was very small. It also came out that while police were looking at the DNA on the knife, they were also looking at 50 other pieces of evidence that had Meredith's DNA on it, like I mentioned earlier. And they basically argued that this DNA was not credible and therefore should not have been used as evidence against Amanda. A DNA specialist named David Balding, who was hired by the Italian Forensic Association to investigate Meredith's bra strap, and his conclusion was different from the others. He concluded that the bra strap had various DNA pieces of Raphael that he did not think would happen just by cross-contamination. He believed that Raphael could have been involved in the murder because of this information, but there was no reliable trace of DNA of Raphael or Amanda at the crime scene. On June 27th, 2011, Rudy took the stand again, and at this point, Rudy's sentence had been knocked down to 16 years from 30. While he was on the stand, he claimed to be completely innocent and that all other inmates claiming he confessed were lying. Rudy had also stated that in the past, he believed that Amanda and Raphael were the ones who committed the murder. He said he did say that statement, and he still feels that way. During the trial, Amanda made a very emotional statement, basically just talking about how she was convicted of a crime that she did not commit and how she felt so sorry for her family. On October 3rd, 2011, another verdict came in for Amanda's appeal. Amanda and Raphael were finally acquitted and were wrongfully accused. The public reaction was not great after this verdict, and many people in Italy were shocked and disgusted by these two. They thought that they were murderers and could not believe that they were getting out. People had even gathered up outside the courtroom and were screaming many negative things towards them. After reuniting with her family, they got on a plane and went back to Seattle. When she got back, she thanked everyone in America for all of their support, and there were a lot of people that believed Amanda was innocent. When Amanda got back to Seattle, she started studying creative writing at the University of Washington. She had gotten her own place and was starting to rebuild her life. However, people recognized her. She felt like people knew her entire life and that she had no privacy. On March 26, 2013, the Italian court overturned both Amanda and Raphael's acquittals. They basically used circumstantial evidence to claim that she was still guilty. Amanda and her family were horrified. They appealed this new verdict on September 30th, and Amanda decided to refuse to leave America until the trial was over. The judge ordered a new DNA test on the knife, saying that they found new DNA on it. But this was a very small discovery, and it was a very small amount of DNA on the blade. It did match Amanda's DNA. They argued that the reason why her DNA was on the knife is because she had just cooked a meal at Raphael's house. And supposedly Meredith's DNA was not on the knife after this investigation. On January 30th, 2014, the judge found Amanda and Raphael guilty again. She was sentenced to 28 years and 6 months in prison, and he was sentenced to 25 years and his passport was confiscated. They, of course, appealed this. After this, there would be no more appeals, so everything was on the line. After 2 days of deliberation, on March 27th, a panel of 5 judges came to a verdict. It was found that Amanda and Raphael were not guilty and were free to go. This case was then closed right after this verdict. The court said that they were acquitted because there were so many flaws in the investigation and the fact that the media was so intense, making people biased, and there was so much pressure on the police to find someone that was guilty and things were rushed. They said that there was not enough DNA of them at the crime scene, but the court did say that they had sufficient evidence to find Raphael guilty, but they decided not to. At this point, Amanda was officially a free woman, and Raphael was also free, and he had his own internet company back in Italy. Now, Raphael is a true crime specialist on an Italian true crime TV show, and police still believe that Rudy was not the only one involved in the murder, but somebody else got away with it. Amanda graduated from college in 2014, and she's now an advocate for women who are falsely painted to be something that they're not. Earlier in 2018, Amanda created a show on Facebook Watch called the Scarlet Letter Reports. She's really into spreading awareness about how the media can be abusive and twist things to report fake news. And in 2016, like I mentioned earlier, Netflix created a documentary on this case as well, and Amanda wrote a book in 2013 somewhat about this case and somewhat just about her life in general. I mean, this case takes so many twists and turns throughout. It's hard to kind of hone in on one verdict, considering her and Raphael got both of them twice. In my opinion, I honestly think they're both innocent because it was all circumstantial evidence is the reason why they got convicted.
Mm-hmm.
I think Rudy definitely did it because it was clear that his DNA was there, and that it was clear that he most likely was one of the people that did it. But I think those two, in the end, got the fair result.
I mean, whatever you said that the court said that they had enough evidence to convict
Raphael.
Yeah, what was
but
that?
they decided not to. One,
Yeah.
that's your job. You're supposed to do that if you can. And two, it's hard to believe that with how many times they've been wrong. I mean, it doesn't really make sense to me that they would say they have this evidence, enough evidence to convict him of a crime as serious as murder, and then be like, we don't need to do that.
Exactly.
Very flawed, yeah.
I could bench 1,000 pounds. I just don't want to.
Right.
I could.
I mean, I think part of that statement was saying that initially they thought they had enough evidence, but in reality they didn't. I mean, I don't remember exactly the context but it was in, but I think that was the context, that initially they thought they had enough evidence, but in the last appeal they found that they didn't.
Yeah.
So I think it was them kind of backtracking on their initial reports.
I mean, I just think it's like how do you just decide not to convict someone you think is a murderer of murder? Like, how do you decide, like, oh, we think this person committed this crime, but we don't need to convict him because we don't want to.
I just
Like-
think they did a horrible job from
Right.
the
This
start.
entire
Hey,
case
man,
is just
yeah.
I mean,
terrible.
This goes back to the 54 mistakes that they found.
Yes.
And then you finally think you found evidence, and then you decide to let that guy off. I just think you need a better group of people from the start to be able to get it straight down to the point as quick as possible and not be conflicted on two different decisions.
I mean, like I said earlier, with it being in another country, it's just so tough because, I mean, we know here in America, like myself, there's so many people that go to college to study forensic science and study this type of field and to be a pro in this type of field, where in other countries you don't really hear about that a ton. You don't hear, there's this massive forensic college over in, Italy, England, wherever. You hear about it obviously in the U.S. because, we're in the U.S., but you would at least think that you would hear about, some big name investigator in another country at some point, if this is the type of stuff that you study. And you really don't hear that in other countries. I think that's the major flaw is if this type of thing happened in America with the same situation and everything, it would have been taken care of a lot better. I just think it was improper training and they didn't handle it the correct way. I think they could have taken a lot more precautions, like switching their shoe covers from room to room.
Yeah.
And making sure that all evidence was secured, because when they came back after 40-some, 50-some days, all of the clothes and stuff that were evidence were found in a hamper in the corner of the room. So the entire crime scene was contaminated. It was taken out of order. I think if they just secured all the evidence initially, we wouldn't be having this question of was there another person or was it just Rudy?
Right, and
I think we would know if it was somebody else or not.
And then also, while you're investigating, you have to take into thought that she was living there, so her DNA is going to be everywhere.
Yeah, and that. It doesn't seem like they took that into account. It seems like they were just saying that, her DNA was in the house, so it had to be her.
Yeah, but if you
live
there,
2 rooms away, of course your DNA is going to be there.
But I also want to comment on the media presence surrounding this case, because usually, I mean, in things like serious like this, usually what comes out is what they want the public to know, not necessarily what is like the full story. And I think that definitely happened here, because we see that with the 2 vastly different viewpoints from America to Italy on this case. I think it goes to show that what you see in the media is not always the full story. It's probably more so what people want the public to know rather than what they should know.
I agree completely.
And
So wait, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I think if Amanda was Italian, it wouldn't be so much of this painting this picture of her being a monster.
Right.
And being this person that was easily capable of this type of crime, and somebody that in the Italian court's eyes did it for a while. I think because she is American, it skews towards the advantage of Italy. The court in other countries is so corrupt at points that if you're an American in their court, you're instantly seen as the enemy. Because you're not from there, they don't know what you're capable of, and just things like that.
Yeah, it's a good way to sell copy. This American student thinks she can just come over here and be above the law and demonize her, and the way they kind of invent idiosyncrasies. Oh my, she was doing exercises in the waiting room while Raphael was being interrogated. Yeah, maybe because she was nervous.
Right.
She cuts a Snickers bar with a fork and knife. She must have committed murder. Ridiculous. Did they ever give a motive for killing Meredith? Was there ever even a motive suggested?
Their initial motive for Amanda to do it was that Meredith didn't approve of her being so outgoing and so extroverted, and having these parties and bringing people back to their house without Meredith agreeing to it and stuff like that. That was the initial reasoning for it, but as the case went on, they just kind of lost all reasoning. They just basically said she had to have done it.
That's a motive for Meredith to kill Amanda, not vice versa.
Right. That has nothing to do with, like, oh, I don't like that this person's so outgoing. Let me just kill them. Or I don't like that this person's so introverted. Let me kill them so I can be outgoing. Like, where's the logic?
This case was like drawn up to be something way bigger than it should have been.
Right.
Like, it should have been textbook what they should have done
Right.
to figure it out.
I mean, I think a lot of it comes from the fact that it was so brutal.
Yeah.
I think if it was something like we see in the U.S. or we see in the U.S. a lot, not, every single case, but a lot of cases where it's not brutal. It's just, this one thing and just ends up being a murder. I think because it was such a brutal case, evidence-wise and crime scene-wise, is the main reason why there was so much media coverage on it and why they were trying to rush to find somebody. Like, there's so many cases where you see they try to rush to find somebody that's guilty because of media or because it was so brutal, and a lot of times they get the wrong person, or they get the right person, but it doesn't match their description of who they think could have done it. It's all that initial
Like, they get the right
thought.
They get the right person, but like with no. They get the right person without
no evidence
any
towards them.
evidence to back it up.
But then they get the wrong person and they say there's evidence
Right.
for it.
Like, them getting the right person is just pure luck and chance at that point.
Yeah, but at that time, that's when you gotta say forget the media and actually take the time to find out who did it and how it happened instead of rushing. And then you get like 20 different times where it's correct and not correct. Like,
Right.
you keep on going back and forth and never finally figure it out.
And I mean, I guess if we look at this case in retrospect, the bright point of this case is that somebody is or was doing time for this murder. Since prior to recording this, he was released a couple years ago, or last year, something like that. But there was somebody serving time for this murder, so it's not totally overthrown by the fact that Amanda got off with possible murder. It's somebody was serving time, somebody was convicted, whether it was just him or not. You at least get justice for Meredith and her family. So I think overall it was, obviously traumatizing for Amanda, Raphael, their families, but at the same time, they made steps in the right direction, but they just couldn't follow it up with more.
Wow, so did Rudy get off for good behavior or something like that? Or like, how long was his term? Because you had said that second conviction, she was going to get 25 years.
His initial was 30, and they
Oh, that's right.
tried him and took it down to 16.
That's right, you said that. I remember you saying that.
And I think he got off last year.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I don't know what he's doing now. I haven't looked that much into that. But it's also amazing to see how both Amanda and Raphael took out of this experience to go into helping people that were in the same situation that they were. Where, like I said, Raphael is part of a true crime TV show, and Amanda is helping women that are in the same position that she was in, or women that are painted to be something that they're not. So I think it's there's definitely positives to take out of this case, but I think at the same time it's
a lot of negatives.
Yeah, it's a lot of negatives, both on Italy's part and on Amanda and Raphael's part for their possible involvement. I think if they had helped the police more, they would have initially gotten off. But I think because at least Amanda was so against helping the police, that it really just made it look like she's the one that did it.
Of course, if you don't know anything, it's hard to help.
Yeah, I mean, but she didn't seem very cooperative.
Mm-hmm.
She seemed like she was very against being, interrogated, investigated, whatever. Like, even when they were looking at the knives in her house, how she reacted to that. That just, when you do stuff like that, obviously it was a traumatic event, whether she's the one that was there or not. When you realize that something like that could happen, obviously you have an extreme response, but to not necessarily have a reasoning for it is what put her in a bad spot. I think if she had a concrete reason for why she reacted that way when they were looking at the knives, I think they would have said that she wasn't guilty, or that she wasn't as much of a suspect as she was.
Mm-hmm.
I think her reaction to the entire case is what kind of threw her under the bus.
That's fair.
I mean, I don't know if you guys have any last closing.
Better police work.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's for all cases. That's not
Yeah.
just this one.
I mean, to be fair, if there was better police work, this podcast wouldn't be a thing.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, that's part of the reason why I'm
yeah.
going into forensics is
Yeah.
to try and stop as many things like this as possible.
That's gonna be the end of the 6th episode of the University School True Crime Podcast.